Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Good Deeds Note Investing podcast. I am your co-host, Jamie Bateman, joined today by Mr. Christopher Sevigny. 7E, right?
No.
Savini? I'm just kidding.
Sweeney. Sweeney.
So one thing I just thought of, so this is our second, we're doing back-to-back episodes today. I just did my Cash Flow Expo presentation, and Chris is going to do his. It reminds me of when my buddy Travis was on Jeopardy back in 2003, 2004. I went out and watched him. He won 5 straight episodes, and it's when they had the 5-game limit, and he won $93,000 and a Jaguar, which was awesome. But what was pretty interesting was they record 4 or 5 shows, in the same day, and so you go back and. What Chris and I didn't do is we didn't change clothes. So it looks like we've just been wearing the same thing for the last 8 days. Anyway, Chris, how are you doing today?
Good. And to add that story, I've gone and saw one live production like that. And it was the Montel Williams show back in 1997 or 8. And the episodes one on was cloning, because that was when Dolly the sheep was being cloned, and the other was on Peeping Toms.
Interesting. We'll just leave that there. Okay.
When we were college, we used to watch Montel. It was like kind of like, people would watch Springer and stuff. We enjoyed Montel. So there you go. So thank you, Jamie. So my presentation, and if I get a little fired up today, it's, second episode, as you mentioned, recording today. So did my presentation. So last year, people enjoyed my presentation on the true cost of note investing, which
I will say real quickly. Sorry, I only listened to I only watched 2 episodes, and yours was one of them. It was very good. So
thank you. And people who know me know I keep things real, and I don't overinflate things, and I try and put things in perspective for people to understand. And on our last episode, I briefly touched upon, scaling a business and some of those things. So mine was based off of that. And I went through the common myths of note investing, how to get started, overcoming the F word, which we'll talk about in a minute, and then kind of just the scaling your business. And, when people look back, like any business, just like Rome, it was not built in a day, and no business is built in, that time frame. So I, wanted to talk first about some of the common myths, which, first one is you can start a note business with no money, which Jamie, you've kind of already mentioned that. And then the other is you can walk into a bank to lend money to arbitrage an owner-occupied note. And those, I think, are kind of like the Loch Ness Monster and Bigfoot in my mind. And I'm curious to what your opinion is.
Yeah, I mean, you hear people talking about doing it. From what I've seen and done, I think you have a lot more success hypothecating, like once you've already own a note, and then, getting a loan on that note, using the note as collateral for a private investor as opposed to a bank. So I think so if you're Dave Van Horn with PPR and you've got a big portfolio compared to us, they may have $150,000 line of credit, because they've established their business and they have much more to back it up. That's very different than what you're talking about.
Yeah. And I'm talking about like, you're getting starting, like, okay, how can I get money? And I, see on websites, people be like, oh yeah, you can do that. And the first question I ask is, give me your contact. And they're like, well, I can't. I'm like, well, banks aren't like, oh my God, I'm only going to lend to you, Jamie. Banks will lend to anybody qualified. So like that contact is kind of a joke if somebody doesn't give it to you, because guess what? That contact doesn't exist, because if you give that contact out, that person is going to like you more because they're making money because you're referring people to him.
Absolutely.
The other ones that I broke out were, starting out that you can make 6 figures in your first year in notes, starting with like $20,000 to $50,000. So you can 2x to 5x your money in your first year. And also, when you get started, you can just post on Facebook, hey, I find fun flip deals, give me your money. And I'm going to raise all this money without knowing anything about this note that I just found and I don't even own.
Haven't seen it work.
So, so would you say those are those myths, or do you think there's some, factual evidence behind that, out of curiosity?
I mean, one of it, just to the one about starting a note business with no money, you're always going to have an obstacle. I think you can do it by, maybe the whole brokering notes, you need to be licensed and that kind of thing. But people do it in real estate wholesaling. So there are ways to do it, but you're not going to do it very easily, not by owning notes and holding them. Yeah, these are all myths. I mean, it sounds good. It sounds great to sell the lifestyle. But again, take the long view.
Yeah. And again, there's always an exception to the rule. But, when you look at 99%, it's like note brokering. How many actual note brokers do you know?
Not many.
Yeah. And there's a reason why. I mean, wholesalers is completely different because, they, can go, it's much easier to find properties than it is to find notes. And if you're finding notes without really being in the business, most likely most note investors already have that contact and already have seen that. So,
yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So Jamie, if someone said to you, when do you think if I started in this business, how long would it take to make money? What would you tell them? What do you think? Or most businesses in general?
I would say I actually didn't see your slide until right now. I was going to say 2 to 3 years.
So I share my slide with Jamie.
Yeah, I was going to say that same answer. Yeah, I honestly probably 3 years.
So you've already listened to my presentation. If you Google it, most small businesses take 2 to 3 years. And notes is a little bit different because of the slow play. And what I mean by that is, the business, when you first year in notes, I'll push educate yourself. Don't just take a weekend training and think you can go out and buy a note. I took about 6 months. Typically, most people take 6 to 9 months. I know some have gone as quick as 3, but they're still educating themselves. Now, things are a little bit different. Like I spent probably 2 months just building a calculator, which if I had one already done for me, okay, maybe I could have been down to 4. But I've also spent, at the time, almost 20 years in real estate and had extensive background. So somebody who's not in real estate, not managing people, the first year you're going to spend, I anticipate 6 to 9 months educating. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. How you educate, I mean, that's the, that can be done many different ways, but play to your strengths. Everyone has strengths that they're bringing to the table, but if you don't have 20 years experience in commercial and residential construction and real estate, you're probably going to want to allow yourself a little more time than you did, Chris. I mean,
so let's say you took, 6 to 9 months and then you started bidding on assets. Typically you'll probably end up bidding for several years, for bidding for several months on, so forth and so on. So there's that time. So the first year I tell people, understand not only how to notes, but the note business. And what I mean by that is you want to know the rules and concepts, and you want to kind of know what's the procedures for bidding. What's, kosher for due diligence? Like if I back out a deal, what can you do, what you cannot do? And the biggest thing I talk about is the ethics, because this is something that, people need to understand. And I don't think it's that they're unethical in the true sense, but they're acting in an unethical manner. And I go into talking about how, I agree with somebody on a deal, we agree to price, I'm doing my due diligence, and they turn around and basically like, well, somebody else is giving me more money, and I'm going to pull it from you. Well, you already kind of, accepted my indicative bid. I've spent money ordering title, attorney look at it. I just dropped $500. Like, and you're going to pull this from me? Like, are you serious? I mean, you want to get blackballed. That is the easiest and fastest way to get blackballed in this business. So I can't stress that ethics enough. And from that perspective, and curious if you have any stories, Jamie, like that.
I've definitely had that happen. And it's quite frustrating. That's why you have the due diligence phase. It's kind of that second phase in a transaction is, okay, I've got this locked up as a buyer. We've agreed to this. You're not going to sell it to someone else, but let me do my due diligence and then I will close. The other thing is I know Gail talked about this years ago, but if you're the buyer, don't back out because, I couldn't find the money. That's a good way to not be able to do business in this industry. And was going to ask you, so expectations first year, what do you think, were your expectations off at all, or did you have any misconceptions within for the first 12 months?
So, I having, you know, again, because of my background, and while I didn't have a business, managing a construction project is like its own separate business. You have your own separate budget, you have your own separate contractors. It's basically like managing a business. And, some jobs I did were 70 to 100 million back in, when I started 5, 6 years ago, and even 140 million. So, I mean, on the scale of things, that's pretty big, from compared to a lot of things. So it's like running $140 million business. So you see a lot of things. So I knew it wasn't, snap of a finger. So I kind of went in knowing I'd educate, and I had analysis paralysis as well. But some presentations I saw were, hey, you can make, a few $100,000 in your first year. And then they're like, okay, you take my training this weekend, you go buy a note next week, a $50,000 note for $25,000. Basically you get the borrower reperforming after 6 months and sell it at 90 cents on the dollar. And all of a sudden you're selling it now for 40, 45 grand, plus you collect the payments. So you get 15, basically you're doubling your money.
In your sleep.
Easy, in your sleep.
Easy peasy.
And, basically, you do, and you get JV partners with that, and you do that 5 times, boom, there you do, you're done, or 10 times, whatever the number is. And it's like, I see that and I'm like, that's probably not happening. And it's like, okay, how many people actually do that? And then you look at everyone like in these classes and like, oh, how many classes do you take? Oh, I've been doing this 2 years. You making 6 figures? Nope. Have you bought a note? Yep. 1. It's like, okay. So, my expectations in the first year. So I started, I think in like April or May, I want to say, doing research. And my goal was I wanted to buy a note by the end of that first year. So I wanted to, buy a note by, basically within 8 months.
I'll say for me, one of the mistakes I made was going too passive, believe it or not, in the first year, meaning I set up my LLC and, I had some money to invest. And then I did some JV deals and some more kind of quote unquote passive investments. But for me, if I'm not actively kind of engaged in that, I'm not going to spend 2 months building my calculator. I'll just be honest. Right. So it's like, I actually was probably too passive, where I wasn't learning enough in the first year. And then once I got kind of that second year, I got a little impatient and probably overpaid for some loans. And so you got to find the right balance for yourself. That tension never goes away because you're never fully prepared. But I learned by doing, but you're absolutely right. You need to educate. And that doesn't stop. We talked about on the last episode, a deal that we're doing due diligence on. We've, in our fund alone, I think you and I have both learned several things, after we started our fund on particular situations. And
I'm learning every day something comes up. I mean, I got an email right before this where we have a lost note affidavit and so forth, and it's a foreclosure. Again, it's vacant property. It's been going on for a long time. And then the attorney's like, well, where's page 2 of the note? I'm like, we don't have it. We have the lost note affidavit. I'm like, is this a problem? And it's like, it better not. To me, it's almost like it better not be, because I probably spent about $5 grand on this thing already and down this road, and you did a collateral review. So
right.
So
yeah.
I'm a little upset.
But but I don't, people like to say, oh, get educated and then take action. Well, yes, I agree for sure. But you don't stop getting educated is my point.
I mean, it's a business, it's your job. And think of like, most people, I'm assuming, have a 9 to 5 or have a job they've done. And, do you just, I'll, do one thing all day long and don't do anything else? Or do you basically do something that you're constantly learning and constantly growing? And, a great quote in, I think it's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I think it's in that book where he talks about, basically
Stephen Covey. Yeah.
Stephen Covey. And, where this is where I get the F word from, overcoming the F word, which is fear. And he states in the book, like, people will rise to the position of in a company till they get too afraid to move up. And it's absolutely true. Like I've got, I'm a senior manager in a company and I have people that work for me and they're like, I like my position. I don't want to go any higher. I'm good where I am. And the reason why is because they're fearful of taking on that additional responsibility and so forth. So something to remember is, as you grow and so forth as part of business, you're only going to grow as much as you can overcome your fear.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So the other thing in the first year is really, map out your plan and goals. When you start, okay, I want to buy my first year, and then, start thinking about your systems, but your systems are always going to be evolving and changing. I can't tell you how many systems I've changed as I've grown over the years. It's constantly changing, not because it's in two reasons. One is technology keeps advancing. I mean, now, God, there's artificial intelligence out there that can probably tell you how to manage your notes for you. And then there's, just, what suits your needs from that perspective. What's so funny, Jamie? So, you want to do what suits your needs or fits your desires. So like some people like Excel, I mean, Mac versus PC. Some people like Excel. Some people like, Click, what is it? Click, the one Jeff uses, Click, I can't think of it. But the other Excel, but the ClickUp, some people like ClickUp, some people like Trello, some people like Podio. I mean, do what fits you. I used to use Google for Gmail. Now I use Outlook. I made that whole change. So, it's going to evolve, but make sure you're smart about when you do that, that you plan it out as well.
Yeah. At least know what type of system you need, right?
Yes.
You don't have to pick the exact system yet.
So, So, after the 6-12 months, 9 months, whatever, year 2 really is kind of looking to buy that first asset. And, when you're buying it, I talk about don't be an idiot. And what I mean by that is I see people buying without being educated, buying from their mentor, not following processes and procedures. I give an example of somebody tries to sold me a note in New York that was a second position. They bought it for $2,000 with $60,000 UPB. And basically they're like, hey, what did you give me for this? I said, well, who's your servicer? He says, well, it's a servicer. I'm like, well, who's sending out the statements and collecting payments? He goes, I don't have any of those. I'm like, okay, do you have a title report? He goes, no. I said, did you ever look at the property? He goes, no, I just had a few $1,000. So I figured I'd take a wing at this and had a $60,000 UPB and and it had these many payments. So I figured like, oh, maybe I could collect like 150 grand on this. So I figured I could maybe sell this thing for like 40 grand and make a quick 40 grand. I'm like, do you think somebody's experienced in this would sell something for 2,000 if it's worth 40? I'm like, I hate to bust your bubble, and please don't take this the wrong way, but you're not educated and you know it's worthless.
Yeah, I had, and about this, I had somebody approach me to see what they could do about this pool of non-performing loans. Yep. This was probably 6 months ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I always say like 6 to 8 months, whether it's been 5 years, I don't know, but they
previously,
they bought last year, pretty sure, but they bought, and I think they have access to capital, and they bought, this was, I don't know, 50, 60 loans. This was not 4, it was, and so they know what they're doing in the space of real estate and different real estate, asset classes and strategies, but they'd never really gotten into notes. Well, they bought up this whole pool and then they just sat on them. Same kind of thing. It was, they weren't with servicers. Exactly the same thing. I said, so what servicers are these with? Oh, they're not with servicers. 50 loans, not with servicers. And they hadn't done anything until, just recently to try to figure out what they could do. So I would say 2/3 of them at least were worthless, entirely worthless. And that because of statute of limitations issues or no servicer or whatever else. And they could have salvaged them if they'd acted quickly enough, but that kind of blew my mind.
So I have a question for you.
Yep.
As people go to buy the first note and so forth, what is something as a business, not actually evaluating the note or and so forth, from that perspective, but as somebody like, as a business person, what is one of the, I don't want to call it mistakes, but what is something that somebody should probably do that most people don't do? And this is a very open question, but I had something in my mind. that.
So starting your note business from a business standpoint that you should do.
So I took 8 months of training and so forth.
Yep.
And I'm like, okay, I'm going to buy a note, and, I'm starting to bid on notes and so forth. And then someone's like, okay, well, whether you're bidding on the note or you get it under agreement, what's something maybe during that time you should probably do?
I mean, there's a bunch of things, but
Yeah.
You should figure out what servicer you're using, or I think you're
Mhm.
thinking bigger, right?
Yeah. What I'm thinking is get help. Meaning, no.
Yeah.
And what I mean by
No,
that is
no.
ask somebody, like, and
Yeah.
say, Jamie, you were talking on the podcast about this note in New York. I'm looking at one, can I just pick your brain for 2 seconds and have you take a look at
Mhm.
this? And
Yeah.
if you do that to investors, most note investors are happy to assist. Now, they're
Mhm.
not going to do a full-blown due diligence and spend 3 hours on the note for you. But, if they want to hop on the call for 15, 20 minutes and pick their brain, and you say, hey, well, here's the attorney I use because this is really an attorney thing, or here's who you can go to, get some help,
Yeah.
get guidance. I think that's one of the mistakes I see a lot of people making. And then they'll buy a note, and they'll, and then after the fact, they'll like reach out to me and be like, oh yeah, I bought this note and stuff. I'm like, why didn't you ask me before you bought this? Oh, well, you're too busy or this or that. I'm like, I'll tell you if I'm too busy. Yeah, I am busy, but I don't mind spending 15 minutes to help somebody out, to try and save them 20 grand.
Yeah. No, and another thing that came to mind is that, one of the things I've been mentoring, particularly one person on, is things that there are things that I kind of took for granted that weren't related to doing due diligence on an asset, but and getting a safe, setting up an LLC if you're going to, safe for if you're going to keep the collateral yourself, but setting up an LLC and starting a bank, opening a bank account in an LLC. I had done that a bunch of times before. I just didn't really think about that as far as, oh, I'm going to be mentoring on this topic. And this is just one example. We go right into due diligence on an asset. That's important, but there's more to it if you're going to treat it even like a part-time business. There's more to, you need to look at it like a business, not like a one investment, one off on this asset. Who's your seller if you are buying a note? I mean, that's probably more important than the asset itself, right? So people get really wrapped up in the due diligence on an asset, not downplaying the importance of that. You do want to buy it right. You don't want to buy something that's worthless, but there's more to this business if you're running a business than just due diligence on an asset, or, using a calculator. Because as soon as you buy that asset, your calculations are wrong. You've said that before.
Yep.
So yeah, anyway, yeah, definitely get help. I mean, it kind of plays to what you're saying, but
yeah. And you're actually
not alone.
Yeah. And you just, went over my entire next slide. So thank you, but I'll reiterate it. Well, about businesses and growing your businesses, there's many different facets. Like you mentioned, there's the proper systems of, like you said, setting up an LLC bank account. How do you do that? Registering your business, registering it in other states. Do you need licensing? Certain software, if you're doing certain software like skip tracing, they may want to see, you have a safe in your house and a paper shredder. From that perspective, who's doing your books? Are you using a bookkeeper? Are you doing it yourself? How does that work? So understanding, the systems and the staff, to me, are something that, you really got to look at how you're going to manage. And, for me, I spend a ton of money on systems to try and minimize staff. Others will spend, significant amount on staff and then, use other types of systems, but they're more staff heavy versus I'm more systems heavy. There's positive and negatives to both, that we don't have time to go over today, but just understand that as you grow, people and systems are very important, because remember, you want to be efficient with your systems, but not with the people you work with. As you start making money, you got to pay Uncle Sam. People think, oh, I made 10 grand on this note, I can just go reinvest it. Ordinary income, if you're using your retirement account or not. But, when do you go from an LLC, if that's what you're into, an S Corp? If you Mark Kohler, somebody I watch, and, if you're making 40 grand or more, you go over to an S Corp. I think that was the number, but, so how do you manage your profits? That's another aspect of growing your note business, that you're not a note investor anymore. I'm sorry. you're not investing in notes. You now have a note business, and these are some of the things you have to tackle.
Another thing I'll mention is, I know we're wrapping up here shortly, but how much are you going to market? Like, meaning like you and I, we have a podcast, we're out there, and that plays into maybe you should have a couple different entities. And, we're getting a little bit slightly complicated for the brand new note investor, but I probably bought too many notes in my one entity, right? And you don't buy, I don't think, anything in your outward facing entity.
70 Investments owns no assets.
So, that's a good thing. So just thinking long-term, okay, are you going to sell partials? Well, now I'm kind of committed to holding these notes in a particular LLC that I maybe, it's less liquid. So think about, 2-3 years down the road, how you want your business to look from an entity standpoint.
Yeah.
And you don't have to be a marketing, I don't think Chad Erbschot does any marketing. I never see him out there, but he's very successful. Yeah. So
you know why? Because he's a hunter, not a farmer.
And he's got a track record, and he's, proven that he is successful.
Yep. So, following along that timeline, year one, again, back year one, you're educating. Year two, you start to acquire and manage. In that second year, you look to buy some more assets. You want to understand how to manage them properly. You're always continuing your education component from that perspective. But that's really when you're starting to go from investing in notes to being a note investor, I'd say, is kind of, within that year two time period. And as you start buying in year two, if you have performers or you have non-performers and you have to, go down some legal route, typically by middle of year three, you're basically starting to liquidate some of those. So you look to, sell, rinse, and repeat. And then, I basically talk about, kind of in year three is when you're profitable. And then as you start getting profits, year four, you can really, look to start scaling, and you take some of those relationships you build, maybe to raise money, get better assets, from that perspective. Notice that, in any of this, I always talk about get educated, being, doing an education. That's a whole nother topic I'm not even gonna, get into right now, but I know some people, after year one think they can also start educating. I recommend against that, but, you got to do what you need to do from that perspective. But yeah, that's kind of, and when I look back, so I started in 2016. I bought a note at the end of 2016. I had, like I said, I started with 4 notes. In 2017, the beginning of the year, my father passed away. So that kind of threw me, for a bump for a few months. And then I had some personal stuff that went on later that year, but I still ended up buying like 16 notes that year. So
60 or 16?
16, I think, somewhere like 10 to 20. So, but, because I only bought 4 the first year, I wasn't making any money. 2016, I spent money on education. 2017, I was probably spending money on building systems and things along those lines. 2018, I made money, but I reinvested it back into the company. So like I bought, like TMO and some of these other things, which is, as very expensive. So 2018, I really didn't, make anything. 2019 is when I'd say, I'll use the term exploded. I had probably 50 JV partners. I was making really good money. And then I started a fund that year. So that year I probably bought over 100 assets that year, well over, maybe close to 200 in 2019. Then I just continued to grow in 2020. To 2021, I continued to grow. 2021 was my best year ever, from every aspect of the business. And now we're in 2022.
What percentage, just guessing, would you say you've bought that were non-performing notes? Like if the total number of notes you've bought, what percentage were non-performing? Approximately
60 to 70.
Yeah. So how would you possibly make money in your first year? These take 1 to 2 years, 1 to 3, 4 years sometimes to exit. So it just wouldn't make any sense.
Oh, when I was starting out, 90% were non-performing when I started out. it's when I started more doing partials in the funds is when I started. Now, if I look at, I was probably 90% at one point in time, non-performing, 10% performing. Now, like in a fund, I try and do 70-30, but then, so that's 70-30, but then I have a partials business that I have 75 notes and partials. So when you actually balance them out, I'm probably 50-50, plus, now depending on, and I have a performing note fund that I buy more performing in. I have a non-performing note fund. So, and that's, if that's 70-30 and the other one's 100%, when you look at how things scale, it's probably more now in the middle.
I think you could make money in your first, maybe your second year if you're buying performing notes and selling partials, and but you're not going to make a ton.
Yeah. I mean, let's look at it. If you start with 25 grand, and you're making 10%, that's 2,500, but you're still going to have, other expenses that you have, who's doing your taxes? Tax is going to be $500-600 to file a tax return, or even if it's an LLC, roll it up. You have to register your business every year. That's another cost. If you're looking to buy notes and you're doing due diligence and you don't buy it, there's title report and everything else. If you have an email address that you're paying for, if you have, software that you're using. I mean,
they need to go watch your presentation from last year.
Yeah, exactly. And basically, so at $2,500 is long gone already, is what I'm getting at. So you make the money on the note, but you're spending it elsewhere.
So as we wrap up, do you have any final thoughts, or do you have a note and bolt? I got one. If you
go ahead, I'll let you go first.
It's not specific to notes, but just kind of popped into my head as we were thinking, or we were talking. Confidence. You need confidence to be a successful note investor, run a successful note business. Confidence comes from competence. And it may sound cheesy, but competence comes from reps. So you got to do this over and over and over. So you can't, fake it till you make it. Okay, there is some level of, you can do that a little bit, but you're not going to have true confidence unless you know what you're doing. You're not going to know what you're doing unless you do repetitions with help, like you talked about. You should have a mentor or some kind of help.
So here's the thing I'll mention, kind of my note and bolt to tag along in that. This is a business that you need somebody who is very detail oriented to roll up the sleeves and dig into things. If you're, and again, I'm an engineer, so I'm a detail guy. Well, let's say you're a marketing person and you're more at managing people and understanding, and you're great at raising money. You're doing this and doing that. If you are good at that, but don't dive into the details of every single note, and you're buying notes without diving into the details, you're going to get crushed. So either, and that's part of one of the things, is part of, the competent side, is understand your strengths and understand your weaknesses, and build team or systems around you that take care of those weaknesses, because this is a business, unlike certain other ones, where you really got to know every little detail. And really, the people who are most successful are the ones who are like literally reading every page of the title report, taking their time to go through it, understand it, looking at what the mortgage says, if there's any weird language in that, or CFD, and truly understanding it, not just saying, oh, yep, I got all assignments, I'm good.
Yeah, it's just, it's rare to find that combination where, because a lot of detail oriented people just won't take action. So, I know we're wrapping up here. Any final thoughts, Chris?
No, I am good.
All right.
Well, I'll let you finish this off.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Again, please go out and give us a good review. It does help us. And please go out and do some good deeds. Take care, everyone.